Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining this Embase webinar today. My name is Xuanyan Xu. I am the Marketing Manager for Embase at Elsevier R&D Solutions. In this webinar, I will talk about how to find the right information for medical device clinical evaluation report and post-market surveillances. Before the webinar gets started, I want to make sure that everyone can see my screen and can hear me clearly. On the right side of your screen, you will find a box for the feedbacks or for the questions. If it's possible, could you please write in some text, for instance, like I can hear you, I can see the screen clearly, and that will give me a signal to go ahead. Okay, I can see that people can hear me clearly and can see my screen. Great, so let's get started. And this is what I will cover in this session. I will start with the importance of the literature databases and the requirements by the new medical device regulation in Europe and the European Medical Device Clinical Evaluation Report Guidelines. And then I want to touch on Embase and how it is addressing the requirements from the new EU MDR and MEDDEV Guideline. At the end, I want to give you a case study and walk you through how to design the literature search queries effectively so that we can get all the information. I hope you are all familiar with this new European medical device regulation. And one key objective of the new MDR in Europe is to improve the clinical safety and ensure a higher level of safe use of the device technologies within Europe. It is not only affecting the manufacturers that are located in Europe, but also a lot of manufacturers which intend or have already selling their products in the Europe area or in the Europe market. So to the device manufacturer, it means a lot more stringent requirements for the clinical data and a continuous process of the clinical evaluation. The new MDR Article 2 defines that the clinical evaluation means a systematic and planned process to continuously generate, collect, analyze, and assess the clinical data in order to verify the safety and the performances. The clinical evaluation is therefore conducted throughout the entire life cycle of a medical devices and as an ongoing process. It starts from the beginning when we are trying to define the needs or comparing the device with an existing device on the market, identify the safety of the clinical device, and also to identify the performance of the devices. Then through the stage of the asking for a marketing approval. For instance, in Europe, for a CE marking, or in the US, will be PMA or 510K. And then towards the end of the life cycle, that is a post-market surveillance, such as reporting the adverse events, creating the PSUR, and ongoing clinical evaluation, including as well as the on-site auditing. In anticipation of the new MDR, in 2016 June, the European Commission released the revised guidelines on the medical device evaluation. This sets a guideline to the common approach of the clinical evaluation. So this guideline suggests that the CER must be based on the clinical data that comes from literature, from clinical experience, clinical trial, or any combination of these three sources. The guideline also highlights that a common approach of collecting the literature, such as the chapters of the CER should be included literature, and what the sources are for searching literature, what strategy should we use to set up, and how should the process, such as collecting, appraising, and analyzing, should be documented. And all of this have already been mentioned in this guideline. Now, the guideline does give the indication of a structure, but does not mandate one. So in the section A9, it has already proposed a sort of a table of content, what to be included in the clinical evaluation, but there is no generally agreed structure. So there are a lot of different structures proposed by the researchers, by the medical writers, and what I'm showing here right now on this slide is a one of the table of content that has been widely acknowledged and used by the medical writers. And the references of this table, you can find it at the right corner of this slide deck, and I would refer you to read further about this article that is published last year. In this proposed table of content, there are 4 chapters where the systematic review and scientific literature can help. So we can see that starting from the beginning, when we're looking at the clinical background, understanding the current knowledge or the state of art, this is where the published literature can help, such as systematic review, clinical guidelines, health technology assessment reports, as well as the clinical registries can give a very good perspective and understanding of the state of art and even the standard of care. The next is in the chapter for the device under the evaluation. There are 3 areas where the literature can really support, for instance, demonstrating of the equivalence of device and generating the clinical data and also the clinical data from the literatures. Now we will go through a little bit more details how to really address those requirements by searching the literature. And first, I want to go a bit more into the details about the guideline and how this has set up some requirements. So first of all, the MEDDEV guideline emphasized that a comprehensive search across different databases are important. So here it says Medline or PubMed can provide a good starting point for a search. However, with potentially incomplete coverage of European journals and reduced search features, comprehensiveness is not necessarily guaranteed. Additional databases may need to be used to ensure the adequate coverage of devices and therapies in use in Europe. To identify the relevant clinical trials and the publications of user experience and to facilitate the searches by device name and manufacturers. Listed additional databases include Embase and the Cochrane Central Trial Registries. What is also important in this guideline, it is that to take an objective and non-biased systematic search and review methods to include all relevant literature data, both favorable and unfavorable. The guideline here refers to then the Cochrane Handbook for Systematic Review of Interventions. And for some of you who are not so familiar with Cochrane, it is an organization that advocates the evidence-based medicine and informed healthcare decision-making. They produce the highest quality of systematic review, and their review creation handbook is also considered as a golden standard. In the Cochrane Handbook, it suggests 8 steps to create a quality systematic review, which starts with defining the review question and developing the criteria for including studies, and then to search for the studies in different databases. Here also recommends to use various databases to, for instance, including Embase. Then the next step is to select the studies and to collect the data, and then followed by assessing the risk of the bias in included studies, analyzing the data, undertaking a meta-analysis, and then addressing the reporting biases if possible, and then presenting the results and interpreting the results and drawing a conclusions. So here, the search step, for example, we can use is the PICO framework, which is also recommended in the MEDDEV guideline on how to search the literature sections. So PICO stands for the patient, intervention, comparison, and outcome. When the 4 elements are intersected together, the overlapping area is likely to be the studies or the literatures that we want to find that will address the clinical questions that we are looking for. So now we have known a little bit about the literature requirement in the MDR and how the literature should be utilized in the MEDDEV guideline. The next step is that I want to tell you a bit more how is this all related to Embase and how Embase is going to address those requirements we mentioned before. So in this section, I'm going to break it into three parts. So I will talk one by one about how Embase address through one content and through its indexing and through the search tools. So first, Embase, we have seen that already. Hopefully, you remember that we mentioned before that Embase is recommended by the MEDDEV Guideline by the European Commission, and not only for that, Embase itself is also recommended by the European Medicine Agencies for pharmacovigilance practices module 6, and many other regulatory bodies, for instance, Cochrane, and for instance, the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence in the UK, and the WHO Handbook for Guideline Development, European Health Economics Networks. And what's also important, which is that I'm very proud to announce that since the end of 2018, Embase is now also endorsed by the China National Medical Products Administrations in their guideline for collecting and reporting of the adverse drug reactions. So this is all where the regulatory bodies or authorities recommend Embase. So here I'm going to go into the details on what is Embase and how is Embase through content indexing and search tools addressing the requirement in different in the guideline. First of all, Embase is a database, and this is a medical literature database. It now contains more than 36 million records from more than 8,000 journals, among which more than 3,000 journals are not indexed in the Medline. Embase content coverage is specifically focused on the device, disease, and drugs, and its indexing terms are twice the amount of that in the Medline. The information is also up to date for drug safety, for device safety, and evidence-based medicine practices. It is not only limited to English or North American publishers. In fact, it has a lot more coverage in the non-English content, such as journal and articles published in France, in Germany, and as well as in China and a lot more other countries. In addition to that, conference proceedings is a very unique type of content in Embase. Since 2009, we have indexed the conference abstracts from more than 10,000 conferences. And Embase also has dedicated search tools and the filters and also the records management tools to facilitate and help people to utilize the records and the content. So we see that Embase has more than 36 million records, and the data is increasing every day. The literature abundance sounds like something that we all want to have, but the abundance may quickly become somehow overloaded and turn into a noise. If we want to find the right information in the sea of data, what can we do? So this is where the Embase controlled vocabulary comes into play. What I'm talking about is Emtree. So Emtree helps to organize the information and provide the terminology to categorize and retrieve the information, so that in this case, device terms and synonyms for the same concept can be linked together and it can be grouped under the medical device sub-branch. Since 2012, medical device concept was introduced to Embase. It has been already an important focus for the product. So currently, Emtree contains 27 broad device concepts. As you can see here, they are listed as like the tree branches. And it organized over 2 million device records. Emtree also contains the device trade names, manufacturer names, and alternative labels. The list is updated 3 times a year. For instance, when there are newly approved device available on the market, the device that are being considered or the international nomenclature name published by the WHO, we would all include them most up to date throughout 3-time release in the year. In 2014, we also introduced the device subheadings that are device adverse effects, device comparison, device economics, and the clinical trials for devices. So I want to talk a bit more about the subheading because we will touch on this when we are looking at the case real example, the case studies. The subheading provides device a semantic relationship and organize the content. So let's take a common device stent as an example. So now we at the center we see a stent, and through the device comparison, this is subheading, we will be able to find the literature that compares the stent with particularly balloon, with bare metal stent, with drug-eluting stent, and many, many other similar type of devices. And through the adverse device effects, we will be able to identify the specific literature about the restenosis, stent thrombosis, and stent migration, and a lot more other adverse effects that are caused by the stent. And so is for the device economics, or the device clinical trials have been conducted and published in the literature. All the information I'm showing here is actually manually extracted, meaning that our trained indexers really read through the full text articles and extract the relevant, the information, the concept, and then their relationship to make it available to be searched and retrieved in the Embase. And this is how this relationship displayed on the embase.com. So this is one of the records page we are seeing. And when mouse move over on the device term drug-eluting stent, a window will pop up and then telling me the drug-eluting stent is a major focus in this article, and there are two key subheadings related to this drug-eluting stent. So without reading any without reading the abstract, without reading the full text, I am already able to tell that in this article, the drug-eluting stent has caused in-stent restenosis, the adverse events, and the drug-eluting stent was compared specifically with the drug-eluting balloon catheter. So this gives me already a sense, should I read this article, should I spend more time on that, or should I skip it? And this is what we call a deep indexing in Embase. In addition to the concept, in addition to the semantic relationship we have just shown, Emtree also includes the device trade names and manufacturer names. Then it is displayed in the record page like this. So here you will see the device trade name and the device manufacturer's name that are mentioned in this article. And most of us, I think, are familiar with Medline on a PubMed. But in searching, in terms of searching for device information, especially the device trade name and the manufacturer's name, I don't think that this is an ideal tool. There are two reasons. One, the device trade names and manufacturer's name are not indexed in the Medline. And second, there is no specific tool in the Medline on PubMed to facilitate such searches. So in Embase, we have indexing, and then we have a tool to search it. So once I search, for instance, when I search for the Medtronic, in Embase, I'm able to hit more than 22,000 records, while I'm searching for PubMed or for searching on a Medline for PubMed. For Medtronic, I'm only able to get more than 8,000 records. The difference is huge, and the information I may miss is probably also going to be a lot. So realizing the importance of having the device trade name and the manufacturer names, we have started a various project to enrich the Emtree device name, to enrich the Emtree, especially for the device trade names. So now we have already more than 12,000 device trade names available in Emtree that we have worked through. We have included a lot of Emtree terms from, for instance, the UK Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agencies, from the Elsevier Merged Medical Taxonomy, and the device that has been approved by the FDA, and their trade names are from 2010 and 2018. The next step that is one of our this year's focus is to work with the global medical device nomenclature agencies to add additional trade names for the devices. So far I have touched on the Embase content, Embase indexing that can facilitate the literature requirement. And the next is the search tools. So PICO, I hope you still remember that we talked about the PICO that is recommended by the MEDDEV guideline for searching or specifying searching form. And we have a PICO search form available in Embase to facilitate this search query building. And we also have a specific device search name for people to identify the relationship such as device effects, the comparison, economics, and the clinical trials. And now we're coming to an interesting part of this session, a real example or real example case studies. I want to elaborate on all the theories that I have actually put before so that we can discuss some real example on how to design and search the literature for the clinical evaluation report and post-market surveillances. So this is a scenario that I come up. Suppose that I am a CER writer, that I am tasked to do some searches and to create a report. I want to look for some literature that can be used for me. And of course, I want to first read out what is available there. So my job is to build some search strategy to find the best available evidence in the literature for clinical background to see what is the current standard care for drug-eluting stent. And secondly, I want to compare it with other devices and find out what's the clinical preferences. Thirdly, I want to find out all the possible mentions of the adverse device events. And the next is I want to have a look at the possibility of saving some search queries and make it a regular update and alert me whenever there are new mentions of the adverse events available in the literature. So let's start with the first question, a clinical background or current knowledge and a state of art. I think this is a perfect moment to demonstrate using the PICO search form. And here on the left side of the screen, you can see this is how a PICO form or PICO search form would look like on embase.com. There are 5 elements now listed on the right side of the form, and they are specifically referring to population, intervention, comparison, outcome, and additional element to narrow down the search, that is the study design. So we don't need to fill in all the elements in this list. I think we want to look at is the drug-eluting coronary stent and what is the current status. So one of the best way to search or one of the best study to read would be the systematic review. And then you can see once I enter the drug-eluting coronary stent, the system automatically pops out the 26 synonyms that is correlated to this term. And the beauty here is that instead of adding individual synonyms into the search query to make sure the comprehensiveness, the system is already listed and automatically added all those 26 synonyms. So I already avoided the errors and save a lot of time. And the next is to narrow down the search into the systematic review to make sure I'm reading on most non-biased studies and give me the most comprehensive perspective of this study. And once I hit results, I'll come to a results page. So in this results page, I'm able to click through different records to review the abstracts, to look at index terms. Specifically, the index terms that I'm searching for are highlighted already on the records page. And I'm also able to filter all those results into more specified the studies. For instance, a lot of studies can be used to identify the standard of care and the state of art in the practical or practice guideline, or we also call clinical guidelines. And major clinical studies and comparative effectiveness studies also gives a very good perspective of the current status of the study. And next is I want to find some comparison studies. So if you remember in the beginning, I'm looking at everolimus eluding coronary stent. I want to find some other coronary stent that is compared with everolimus. So there are a few ways to set up these search strategies. In this example, I'm going to show 2 ways. First is to look at a very broad and sensitive search. So this search will give me many hits. And also a good way to use is to utilize the PICO search form. So in the intervention line, I entered everolimus eluding coronary stent, and also system helped me to add the additional 11 synonyms. Then I'm comparing with biolimus eluding coronary stent, and there are also 5 synonyms available for this stent, and system also helped me to add it. And then I hit the bottom of show me the results, then come to a results page. So on the top of the screen, you can see this is the result or the search queries that I've built up using the PICO search form. If you remember, what I have entered are only 2 terms, while the system gives me a lot more complicated search queries, including more the synonyms and built in a way that is a logic for searching the results. And secondly, I can see that the search results is very sensitive. It gives me many records, and the reason is that they are identified as a coexisting relationship in the article. So that means this article both talked about everolimus eluding coronary stent and the biolimus. And do they have a direct comparison relationship? At this stage, using the PICO search form, we don't know. So that's why I call it a broad and sensitive search and provides a lot of hits. But if I want to see a direct relationship, so here is the beauty of the subheading that we have explained before. Coming from the everolimus eluding coronary stent, I am able to filter on the left side into 2 subheadings. So let's look at the device comparison now. And then device comparison gives me a list of the devices that has been compared with everolimus eluding coronary stent, specifically in the articles. So this is really done by the manual extracting and manual reading and identifying the relationship. And then next, I select the biolimus eluding coronary stent, and this is able to produce 38 records, and I can see they have a specific and direct comparison relationship. Is it true? So now look at the results page. One of the records, so let's move the mouse hoof over on the targeted, the targeted device that we are searching for, and pop up in a window that we can see everolimus eluding coronary stent is a major focus of this article. There are 2 subheadings we can identify that biolimus eluding coronary stent is directly compared with this desired device. And there is another information about the clinical trial we can look for. And this can be confirmed by reading the abstract of this article. Okay. So next, I want to find the adverse device effects. We can also look in 2 ways, very focused and very broad, and all the possible mentions. So let's first look at the focused way, since we are on the subheading side. So similarly, on the subheading way, and then we can expound from the everolimus eluding coronary stent to the adverse device effects instead of device comparison. So among these 500 records, I am able to see a lot more other specific device effects that are all caused by the everolimus eluding coronary stent. This list is quite long. What I can do is to really export the list into an Excel sheet, then to go analyzing the individual adverse effects that I want to see one by one. And when we look at the records page, and then you can see the everolimus coronary stent has causing the following adverse device effects. For instance, the heart death, heart infarction, and major cardiac events. Is it true? When I look at the full text, and I can find such information that is described in the specific tables and mentioning and referring the major adverse cardiac events. And there is another way of looking at, of finding the adverse device events, is to search all the possible mentions. Now, this is very particular for post-market surveillance searches, so that we want to make sure the search results that we produce is comprehensive and complete as possible. I don't want to miss any possible mentions of the device effects or adverse effects. For example, the query that I am showing here is a very complex one, and this is a combination of the search term, of a free text, of Boolean operators, of approximate search terms, and very long and very complex. So for beginners, it can be very difficult to start and hard to find a right balance between a precision and recall. And to overcome this, and it's just to help this start, Embase is now working on something to help us to actually overcome this. And I'm going to show you this later, right at the end. So once we have now this search query set up, such a complex one, and the idea is that to retrieve all the possible mentions of the adverse events, the next steps is that I want to make sure this search query can be rerun regularly and it can retrieve the newly added literature in the databases. So what I can do is to save this search query in a database that into my own private folder or a folder that I can share this with my team. And the next is to set up an email alert that can create the record or create a hit to me according to my required frequency. For instance, I want to see it every week on the Monday morning, that I want to see if there are any newly added literature that is searched, retrieved by this query. So it's all can be done. And I can also select what type of information I want to see in my inbox. For instance, I only want to see the citation, or I want to see all of the information that the record has been pushed. It is all possible to set up. And once we are facing, for instance, the internal auditing or inspections, it is important to reproduce all the histories of the email alerts of the results that we have received. So this is possible to do in the records management tool in the email alert. Once we look at the email alert, there is a function to export the history. So we can see that the whole history of this search query has been produced and the number of the records and who has received these records. So there is a way of showing it. So now come to the form that I was talking about before, and realizing that it's very difficult for a beginner or for some of us, especially when we are dealing with a lot of different devices. It is very hard to produce a complex search queries to retrieve all the possible mentions of adverse events. So in the product, we are now working to build a stepwise framework that will help to build complex search queries. And this can be really done easily. For instance, I want to first explain the concept that why we build this. So the concept is based on 5 major steps. First, we start with searching the device with a subheading. Then we add all the possible synonyms or alternative labels to this device to make sure we retrieve all the other mentions but same device that we are searching for. And next, we want to add another layer of searching all the adverse device effects, and then special events that we are looking for, and then another additional layer of the study limit. For instance, we only want to look at the limit study that is applied into the human or into one specific particular population. And all the 5 elements in the circles that you can see overlapping together, the intersect part would be the results that we are trying to look for. So this is the concept, the fundamentals of the search form we built. And once we understand that, what you need to do is actually only type in a device name, specify the adverse events, and select some of the limits that you want to limit the search. And this will be able to produce a very complex search queries and give you the hits of the results. And at this moment, this is a functional feature that we are still developing. So we are also looking for a beta test users. If you're interested in testing out this feature and functionality, and if you want to have your saying to be listened or can be heard by the product, I would encourage you to contact us and to recruit yourself, to enroll yourself for this specific user test. And we are looking for the release of this specific form somewhere after the summer of this year. Okay, so in this session, I have discussed the literature requirements that is listed and outlined in new MDR and MEDDEV Guidelines. I have also explained how the literature requirements can be addressed by the Embase through its feature, through its importance of the content, through its indexing, and also through the search tools. And then I also gave a case studies on how to design the effective literature searches for finding the clinical performance information, comparison information, and safety information, and also how to do a continuous update of such information. And in the end, I have also give you a preview of the new device search form that we plan to launch after this summer. And I also encourage you to contact us if you're interested in testing this search functionality out. With that, I thank you for your attention. Should you have any questions about Embase and how to use Embase for device searches, feel free to contact us. You can email me directly, and you can also use the contact us link in the attached section in this webinar and contact us by asking your questions, and our specialists will contact you directly. So here I have two questions, and I would like to highlight on before we close the session. First, the question is, what percentage of articles on Embase are indexed for Emtree? Yes, so I think, so all the content in the Embase are indexed with Emtree. There will be some time of delay with automatic indexing and manual indexing. The principle is that all the content that is included in Embase are indexed. And specifically, the device information, the drug information, and the disease information are indexed with the subheading. And are device adverse effects indexed in such a way that are specifically device related, or are they any device adverse events reported in the publications? So this is a question that addressing to the example that I have shown. There are two ways of searching the adverse events in the Embase. One is that we can find specifically device-caused adverse events, and that we need to utilize the subheading and use this specific filtering in Embase. And second, there is a way for us to build a complex search queries to help us to retrieve any possible adverse events that is reported in the publications. It might have the correlation or the direct relationship with the device, might not, but from the post-market surveillance perspective, we do not want to miss any possible information. So utilizing a much more complex search query would be the way to go. And this is one of the reasons that we want to launch this device search form to help you to build up these complex search queries. I hope all the questions I hope all the information that I have presented today is somehow useful for you, and I found that this webinar for Embase is informative. If you have any other questions about Embase, and if you would like to have a bit more detailed information about Embase, or for instance, requesting a live demo about Embase, I would encourage you to contact us directly. So you can contact me directly by emailing me, and my email address is here. And you can also use the contact us link in the attachment of this webinar, and our specialist will contact you very quickly. And I hope you enjoy the webinar so far. I will see you in our next Embase webinar.